At the airport, an officer humiliated a man, unaware that he was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Passengers' cameras captured the moment, which soon shocked the nation. What happened next will surprise even those who have seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. In a bustling capital airport, Michael Hayes, a 55-year-old African-American man in a sharp business suit, calmly makes his way to the TSA checkpoint. He's carrying a briefcase filled with documents, and a premium brand watch gleams on his wrist. The line moves slowly, when suddenly, a sharp voice breaks through. "Sir, step over here." A young white TSA officer, Chris Miller, points at Michael with noticeable wariness. "Your documents," he demands curtly, scrutinizing the man intently. Michael hands over his passport and ticket. Chris frowns as he examines them, as if searching for something. Suddenly, he asks, "What do you do? Why are you nervous?" "I'm on my way to work," Michael replies calmly. "I'm not nervous. It's a routine flight." But Chris persists, calling for backup. His tone grows increasingly suspicious. "Empty your pockets. Open your bag," he orders loudly, ensuring everyone nearby can hear. Passengers in the line begin turning their heads, and some pull out their phones to record the scene. Without a word, Michael pulls out the contents of his pockets: keys, a smartphone, and a pen. Meanwhile, Chris, frowning, scans through the items. "You don't have anything prohibited, do you?" Chris asks sarcastically. "Of course not," Michael replies, maintaining his composure. When Chris demands an additional search, two other officers nearby exchange uneasy glances, sensing the situation is spiraling out of control. One of them quietly says, "Chris, maybe that's enough? He hasn't done anything wrong." But Chris brushes it off. "We have a protocol. Everything must be checked." The tension rises. One of the passengers loudly says, "Hey, why are you being so rude? You're treating him unfairly." Chris ignores the comment, doubling down. "Sir, proceed to a private room for further inspection." At this point, Michael, still calm, says, "Are you sure you want to continue?" His voice is steady, but there's a warning glint in his eyes. "This is not up for discussion," Chris snaps, unaware that the crowd's support is turning against him. A growing number of people gather around, many now filming the incident. Michael slowly lifts his gaze to meet Chris's and responds, "Very well. I hope you're prepared to face the consequences." The crowd begins murmuring. The other officers grow increasingly uneasy, while Chris stubbornly believes he's in control of the situation. What Chris doesn't know is who Michael Hayes really is. Michael complies with the demands and heads to a private screening room. The crowd murmurs as the scene unfolds, with smartphone cameras continuing to record every moment. One TSA officer, visibly nervous, quietly asks Chris, "Are you sure he's a threat? Maybe we should check with management?" But Chris firmly replies, "I told you, we have protocols. This is my responsibility." In the screening room, Michael calmly places his briefcase on the table. Chris, breathing heavily, begins rifling through the items, opening folders and examining papers that appear highly official. At one point, he comes across an ID badge, but shuts it almost immediately, without bothering to read it. "An ID? It's probably fake," Chris says sarcastically. "We'll call in specialists to verify it." Michael sighs, his expression remaining neutral. "Are you sure you want to go further?" he calmly repeats, his tone firm but measured. "Don't threaten me," snaps Chris. "I'm just doing my job." Meanwhile, outside the room, tension continues to grow. Several passengers recording the incident begin uploading the videos to social media. A woman in the crowd exclaims, "That man looks like an important official. How can they treat him like this?" TSA shift supervisor Mr. Anderson notices the commotion and hurriedly heads toward the scene. He hears snippets of conversations and spots the uneasy expressions of his staff. Inside the room, Chris continues digging through Michael's belongings, going deeper into the documents until he comes across one marked with a federal agency seal. "What's this?" he mutters, frowning, still oblivious to what he's looking at. "Read it carefully," Michael advises, his voice remaining calm. Anderson bursts into the room, his eyes falling on Michael's briefcase and the documents strewn across the table. He freezes, then pales as he reads the title on one of the papers. Director of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. "Chris, step back," Anderson commands sharply, his voice trembling with urgency. "Why?" Chris retorts. "He looks suspicious, and I have grounds to—" "That's Michael Hayes, the DHS director," Anderson interrupts, grabbing the ID badge. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Chris steps back, his face flushing red. A heavy silence falls over the room, broken only by the muffled sounds of the murmuring crowd outside. "Sir, I didn't know," Chris stammers, but Michael, arms crossed, silently stares at him. At that moment, the door opens, and a cameraman from a local news channel enters. The bright camera light floods the room, and a microphone is pointed toward Michael. "Mr. Hayes, are you ready to comment on what just happened here?" Michael turns to face the camera, his expression calm but resolute. "No comment, for now," he says, glancing at Anderson. "We'll be discussing this." The conflict reaches its peak as social media posts about the incident start going viral, rapidly gaining thousands of views. Revelation and climax. A tense silence fills the room. Chris steps back, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Mr. Anderson hurriedly gathers Michael's documents, carefully placing them back into the briefcase. His voice trembling, he addresses Michael. "Mr. Hayes, please accept my sincerest apologies for what has happened. We'll resolve this immediately." Michael remains composed, his gaze fixed on Chris. In a cold, steady tone, he says, "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But today, it will end differently." Outside, the crowd continues to swell. Reporters push to get closer, passengers shout questions, and airport staff struggle to maintain order. Turning to Anderson, Michael speaks firmly. "This isn't just about one officer. This is a systemic failure we can no longer ignore." Anderson nods, shame and worry etched across his face. Chris, still visibly shaken, stammers in defense. I was just following protocol. You have to understand, it's my job." Michael's response is sharp but measured. "Your protocols are a crutch for bias. You looked at me and made assumptions based not on evidence, but on your own prejudices. That is unacceptable." A reporter, now standing in the doorway, shouts, "Mr. Hayes, will you file an official complaint? Will there be an investigation?" Michael turns to face the cameras, his voice calm yet resolute. "My goal is not to punish an individual, but to fix a broken system. I will ensure this never happens again. Not to me, not to anyone else." Meanwhile, videos of the incident are already going viral, amassing hundreds of thousands of views online. Social media erupts with outrage, demanding reform in airport security practices. Anderson, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, offers, "Let us escort you to your plane, sir, to avoid further disruptions." Michael shakes his head. "No, we won't sweep this under the rug. Let's have a meeting right here in this airport. I want every TSA employee to understand what went wrong." Chris lowers his head, his career and credibility hanging by a thread. He mumbles, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Michael raises a hand to stop him. "Apologies won't fix the system. You need to reevaluate your beliefs. This is your chance to change." Chris steps back, his confidence shattered, realizing the gravity of his actions. Turning to the growing crowd, Michael addresses them directly, his voice carrying authority and conviction. "We must strive for justice. Today it happened to me. Tomorrow it could be someone else. Together, we can change this." The crowd erupts into applause, and news cameras capture the moment as a powerful symbol of the fight against prejudice and systemic bias. Resolution and change hours. After the incident, the airport resumes operations, but the fallout from the conflict is already spreading. Videos taken by passengers flood social media, sparking widespread debate. News headlines read, "DHS chief humiliated at airport. Incident exposes systemic bias." Michael Hayes sits in a tense meeting room at the airport, holding an emergency discussion with TSA leadership and airport representatives. Mr. Anderson, visibly uneasy under the pressure of public scrutiny, tries to maintain his composure. "Mr. Hayes, we're committed to implementing all necessary measures to ensure this never happens again," Anderson says, his tone conciliatory. Michael replies firmly, "This wasn't just a random incident. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. We'll start with staff training, updating protocols, and conducting a full audit of TSA procedures. But this is only the beginning." In the corner of the room, Chris sits silently, looking dejected. He only speaks when Michael addresses him directly. "What have you learned from this situation?" Chris lifts his eyes, his voice shaking. "I've realized that my bias and assumptions prevented me from doing my job fairly. It wasn't right. I failed the system and the people I'm supposed to serve." Michael nods. "Admitting your mistake is a first step, but change requires action. Your job now is not only to correct your behavior, but to set an example for others." Public pressure continues to mount. TSA releases an official statement, pledging to review all complaints of bias and implement systemic reforms. Social media explodes with support for Michael and demands for change. A month later, TSA launches a new program, developed with Michael's input, focused on combating racial bias and enhancing professionalism. Chris, having completed additional training, returns to his duties as a more self-aware and empathetic officer. In a public interview, he admits, "This experience taught me the importance of fairness and resisting stereotypes. I'm grateful for the chance to make things right." Michael observes the progress and feels a sense of accomplishment, though he knows this is just the beginning. At a press conference, he declares, "My goal was never personal vindication. It's about creating a system where every individual feels respected and protected. This must go beyond a single event. It must become part of our culture." The story concludes with Michael returning to Washington. As city lights flash by outside his car window, he holds a newspaper with the headline, "Justice Prevails: How One Airport Incident Sparked Change." Though aware of the challenges ahead, Michael feels certain that this day marked a crucial step toward a brighter future.